All right, let's go through an example real quick. I mean, here we're just trying to identify which one of those vocabulary terms best describes different line segments in the circle. Of course, we got a chord, secant, tangent, diameter, radius. You definitely know what a diameter and radius are. Now, we want the most specific term to describe each of these line segments. So here's line segment AD. So we know A starts here, D starts here. So this line segment AD, you might be tempted to call that a chord because it's got 2 points on the circle. But we of course got to pay attention to the fact that it goes through the center point of my circle. And so I know that that special chord that goes through the center point of my circle, that's called a diameter. Again, a term I think most people are going to be familiar with. If I look at this next line segment, the CD, well, that's part of my diameter. It's not the whole thing, it's half of that. It starts at the center point of the circle and hits the edge of my circle. And of course you guys recognize that as the radius. And of course we know that the radius is half of the diameter, so I could write a little formula there. Obviously this radius is half as long as this diameter. And of course that showed up a lot when we used pi and calculated like circumference and area of a circle and that kind of thing. So it's not, again, these two things are things you should be familiar with. Now this line segment EG, E to G, well, we're looking at this line segment. Of course, we're paying attention to how many times this line intersects the circle. And if it just touches the circle at one point, we call that a tangent. And of course, we called the point where the tangent touches the circle, we called that the point of tangency. All right, over here, HB. So this is a line segment that starts at H, ends at B. So it's this line segment that's inside the circle. It touches the circle at 2 points, but the whole segment is inside the circle. That's what I called a chord. This line segment FB, well, there's no line drawn between F and B, but we can fix that pretty easily. So if you have trouble seeing what that is, you may want to draw that line segment. And we see F to B, that starts at a point on the circle, ends at a point on the circle, it's all inside the circle. That's another chord. All right, so if I look at one more segment, let's look at this FE. This is a line segment that starts at F, goes out here to E. The important thing I'm paying attention to when I'm naming these lines is how many times this thing touches the circle. And if it only touches the circle at point F, that's what we call the tangent. Now you may be asking yourself, of course, we're missing one of the terms. We haven't talked about a secant. So take a second, look at this. See if you can figure out one line up here that might be a secant. And so we remember that a secant, it touches the circle twice like a chord, but it goes both outside and inside the circle. So any point that starts outside the circle goes into the circle and goes outside the circle again. That's what I would call a secant. So this line segment that starts at G goes out to K out here. That would be an example of a secant. And similarly, if I start at this point A on the circle, that's touching the circle once. So if I follow this line, I touch the circle twice and go outside of the circle, that'd be another example of a secant line. So be sure that you keep these terms straight. It's easy to get, especially secant and tangent confused, but we'll have some practice with this vocabulary.